The U.S. Post Office has failed and needs a bailout. Also, graduates with massive debt have no jobs to go to even think about paying off the debt. And also, lower gas prices may not last. We're going to talk about all that and more. Hey everybody, JJ here. You're watching Bull to the Bust. It is Sunday. Happy Easter to everybody that celebrates. Happy Sunday to everyone that doesn't celebrate Easter. Now, before we get started here real quick, just want to say thank you to all my supporters here. All viewers, all people that leave comments, all people that have left me tips, my patrons. If you'd like to help keep this channel alive, please check the link below and consider supporting me over at Patreon for as little as $1 a month, and you can really help this channel. And thank you very much. Please check the link below if you'd like to help out. If you'd like the important news and the updates that we bring you. Let's get into the news today. I feel like these are the most underreported news stories out there. So the U.S. Post Office fails, needs a bailout. Can anyone ever imagine a case where a government-run entity would need a bailout? No, I can't think of any other institutions that's happening with. Oh wait, the entire banking system is government-run. Oh wait, the entire government, they can't balance a budget with $23 trillion in debt. And yes, if you didn't know it, the government has been propping up the banks for a long time now, providing liquidity. Of course, you saw the huge bailouts starting in 2008. And ever since then, it's been the Fed acquiring bad assets onto their balance sheet, which has now surged past $6 trillion. And that is just the beginning. So let's talk about the post office. The most recent fiscal year, the U.S. Post Office lost $8.8 billion. And this latest year was not just an anomaly. This was, and this has been, a continuous trend for the post office. Here's an article that came out in May of last year showing the previous year's loss, which was then $4 billion. And at that time, last year, they reported that they were on track to lose $7 billion this year, which was the most recent year that was just reported. But of course, that ended up being much worse than was anticipated. Instead of $7 billion, the loss was $8.8 billion. So as you can see, the post office is a failed institution, and many are asking right now, would the post office be in better hands if it was privately run? Well, sadly, we don't have many private companies left over in the United States except for small businesses, as many of these quote-unquote private companies also depend on government support and bailouts. So corporate America, large institutions, too big to fail banks, they get continuous government support, while small businesses, they get deemed non-essential, and they may be lucky to get a loan at 5% in a stimulus package. But here is the big story in my opinion. So not only has the post office been failing for many years with massive losses, as you just saw, the post office may fail completely and get privatized. Here's what's happening. So the president reportedly said he would reject a bailout package if it included aid to keep the U.S. Postal Service functioning. And this is out of Business Insider. The president reportedly said he wouldn't sign the CARES Act, the $2.2 trillion stimulus package, if it contained a bailout for USPS. Lawmakers have warned that the Postal Service could run out of money by June. Post Office is asking Congress for $50 billion in bailouts and $25 billion in loans from the Treasury Department to make up for losses. So again, another example of the government propping up badly run and failed businesses. So it should be pretty easy for everyone here on this channel to figure out. Anytime you have an entity that's backed by the government that has unlimited currency creation powers, the printing press to infinity, the funny money magic machine, then those entities are no longer incentivized to run their business in a profitable manner because the government's always going to be there to back them or bail them out. And it's basically a hazard to have any businesses continue to operate under these circumstances. But here's where it gets really crazy in my opinion. The Postmaster General and CEO of the Post Office said that it estimated net operating losses of over $22 billion over the next 18 months and over $54 billion in the longer term. Those numbers are just extraordinarily awful. Now, also recently, the post office issued its largest ever increase in the price of a stamp, but it's currently fighting a legal battle to ensure its implementation. Now, also, let's take a look at this pension shortfall. The post office took $7.3 billion onto its books for payments into its retiree pension fund and to pre-fund health benefits for future retirees. Now, the rising costs in the healthcare system, that's a topic for a whole nother video. But as you can see, the post office would not exist if it were being ran like this as a private company without the government there to bail it out. So is it time to let the post office fail and maybe instead be ran as a private company like UPS or FedEx? Well, you let me know down in comments, please. Next, let's talk about graduates with massive debt and no jobs in sight. Now let's take a look at this chart right here. The student loan debt is in the blue, and as we see, we're at higher levels of delinquency now. These are 90-day delinquencies. Higher levels now than just after the financial crisis kicked off there in 2008, 2009. Back then it was only between 6 and 9%, looks like we're at about 8%, and now we're approaching 12% 90-day delinquency rate in student loans. Right, and this is just up to 2019. Just wait until the 2020 numbers come out. We're going to see skyrocketing student loan delinquencies as well as lots of other delinquencies, late payments, bankruptcies, foreclosures, and the list goes on and on. But imagine a graduate just coming out of college with this amount of debt and absolutely hardly any jobs available. It's going to be a complete, absolute disaster. I feel sorry for anyone buried under insurmountable debt. But the really sad part about students is you cannot discharge student loan debt in bankruptcies. Even if the economy opens back up here in the next few months, it's projected that many of the businesses that had to shut down will not be able to ever reopen, and it's pretty sad. And think about this, if delinquencies in student loan debt was already approaching 12% in what they had been calling the greatest economy ever, what's going to happen now in the middle of this collapse and this crisis? Now, CNBC had recently reported that this could be the worst job market for new college grads since the financial crisis. Well, I think it's not could be, I think it's going to be, and I think it's going to be worse than the Great Depression unless they reopen this economy. But even if they do reopen the economy, I think that a lot of the damage has already been done, and unfortunately a lot of these students that are buried under this massive debt could end up debt servants for life unless they restructure the bankruptcy system and allow these students to discharge their student loan debt in bankruptcy. We'll see if that happens. We know there's a lot of big changes being implemented, a lot of restructuring going on, talks of debt forgiveness, and many other things that are going to have to play out in the political system. But this is where we're at right now, a very dire situation for students now graduating. Well, I should say students with debt. Now, there are some students that came from a rich family that paid cash for college, but it is the large majority of students that had to get student loans to go to school. Right? And also think about that. Speaking of government intervention, do you think that the cost of a college education would cost as much as it does now if the government wasn't there to back all of these student loans? Well, of course not. When everyone can borrow money, which is essentially what's happening in the student loan market, then colleges are just going to continue to increase and increase their tuition costs. They're not incentivized to lower the cost because no matter how high they raise the cost of college tuition, the government's always going to be there to keep pumping out loans to these students. And students are actually a very bad credit risk. If it was an actual free market where these lenders were not backed by the government, then these students would have a very hard time getting a loan for college. And therefore you would have to see the colleges charge much lower costs for tuition. And finally, lower gas prices may not last. One of the few bright spots in this situation that we're in right now was the lower gas prices, because demand essentially has dropped off a cliff with all the lockdowns and the shutdowns of the economy and quarantines. Far much less traffic on the road now, therefore much less gas demand. And we saw the lower demand combined with Saudi Arabia and Russia refusing to cut production, but all that may be about to change as we see OPEC, that is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC allies agree to cut oil output by a record amount. So instead of letting oil prices plunge like they should based on the actual supply and demand, they're going to go ahead and cut production. Now, the interesting part, in my opinion, is that the president just a few weeks ago was bragging about lower gas prices and how that's going to help U.S. consumers. And he actually, if I remember right, he said it was basically a tax cut for Americans because everyone's paying lower gas prices now. But now the president's flipping this around and saying that this is a great thing because it's going to save jobs in the oil sector. So a couple ways to look at it. If you're an employee in the oil sector, it's a good thing because the oil companies are going to be propped up and this is going to help the oil companies' profits. But if you're the rest of Americans who like lower gas prices, this is not good news. So what's the consensus? I'd like to hear from you down in the comments. Should they not interject into the markets? Should they just let the oil companies lose money and possibly fail? And what happens when a company fails? It doesn't disappear. For example, the airline industry being bailed out. The airplanes do not just vanish into thin air if the company fails. Right? In bankruptcy, the assets get sold off. Maybe a new buyer, a new investor will come in and maybe run the company in a way that's responsible. That means setting profits aside. That way when something bad happens, they are not going to be begging the government for bailouts. So I say let them fail. If you do not let failed businesses fail, it is a hazard and only encourages more bad behavior. It's almost like rewarding a kid that never does their homework and never cleans their room with a bunch of candy and a trip to Disneyland. It's just irresponsible and it's just insanity. Alright everybody, thanks for watching this report. Hope you're all well and hope you're staying sane in these insane times. Bye for now everybody.